the use of technology for the creation of a society that can elevate humankind, that is a goal that is worth pursuing.
Well, welcome back for season 2 of the Skapa Podcast, Creating the Future with me, Michael Brasseur. And on this podcast, we are focused on bringing on visionary leaders across government, academia, and industry, and really getting their big, bold vision of the future. But more importantly, how do you bring that to life? And we have a very, very special guest today, serial entrepreneur, inventor with 30 patents to his name in the AI and distributed sensor space, author. You see his latest book here, Cybernetic Society, Amir Husain. What a pleasure to join you here on the podcast in Austin. More than that, Amir, personally, you've been a huge inspiration to me. Your video, Innovating in the Age of Exponentials, becoming an innovator in the age of exponentials. And I encourage our viewers to go to your website, amirhusain.com, and watch this video. 17-minute video changed the way I looked at my work, the future, and how I delivered it. You have been a huge inspiration for me personally. Everything I did towards the end of my career in government and now in the private sector. It's a real honor to have you here today, Amir.
The honor is all mine. Michael, you have been a tremendous friend. And while you are a very generous person, and those words of praise, of course, I will take with gratitude. But I will also tell you that what we need more of in the world are people that get things done. And within our forces, it's very difficult sometimes to get complex things done. What you demonstrated in those last few years of your service was that you were willing to fight the good fight. You were willing to, bark up all the wrong and right trees, do whatever was necessary to get the mission accomplished. And I think the example that you've set is something that the service should be thankful for, and something that I witnessed personally. So a big thread today, hopefully, will be not just visions of the future, but those visions moored into the practicality of results today. How can our people, how can civilians, how can the defenders of our countries benefit from the innovation that comes from AI? And that requires reduction to practice. It requires practicality. And that is where I've seen you shine. And therefore, it's a delight to get back with you together again and to speak about the latest such long list of issues that has been in the news and has been top of mind.
One of our first collaborations, what brought us together was the NATO Innovation Advisory Board, which this video that you created inspired. I wanted to bring together a diverse team of innovators across a bunch of different sectors to help us imagine a future for NATO that was different than the past. And we started iterating on this idea of a digital ocean, which now you see coming into reality. We prototyped it at Task Force 59, but you see NATO starting to scale the ideas that we imagined in the Innovation Advisory Board. But we'll get to that in a second. I actually wanted to just understand where you come from. How did this brilliant human get created, and what in your life led you to this point in imagining the future?
So I was born in Lahore, Pakistan, and I was born in a very educated household. My father had studied economics at the London School of Economics. My mother was an excellent student. My grandfather, my paternal grandfather, had gone to Oxford to study law. His younger brother had studied at Oxford. And this is during the colonial times when the British Raj was still ruling all of India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, etc. So for many generations, there was this tradition in our family and a love for knowledge. Even my great grandfather, stories of him carrying his library with him when he would travel from one place to another in caravans. Those stories are still told in the family. My paternal grandmother wrote many books. So I am describing to you being born in and being surrounded by people that I looked up to, all of whom were consumed entirely by this idea that knowledge is good, the pursuit of knowledge is a worthwhile endeavor, and the understanding of knowledge practiced in the real world can lead to betterment. That was instilled in me, my sister, who went on to become a string theorist, high energy physicist, my younger sister, who became a computer scientist, and then my younger brother, who also entered computer science. We would get together for supper, and my father would pose a question, which was philosophical at times, it was confrontational at times, it was perhaps something that he took from the news of the day. And then he would quiz us on, if you were in this politician's shoes, what would you do? What do you think is going to happen? And there was a proper debate, and there was no quarter given on account of somebody being, say, 8 years old.
Yeah.
Because his idea was, and he very early introduced us to the ideas of logic, formal reasoning. I remember he used to constantly give us examples of the fallacy of the excluded middle. And he would identify in stories how, manipulation is possible because structures of how these things come across are not logically consistent. So all of those things left a very big mark on my mind. Now, my father's leanings were law and history and philosophy. My mother's leanings were social work. She worked for decades and decades and established a nonprofit, which has now put more than 2.5 million children that were, that would otherwise not have had access to these resources, given them access to schools and vocational training and libraries and so on and so forth. So her life's mission has been the education of the downtrodden. And she's doing this now at a global level. So I'm describing for you the tall trees that grew in my yard, in my garden. And under the shade of these trees, I had the benefit of growing up. Now, my own aspirations and my own interests were more technological. I got some of this from my father. He loved mechano sets, Erector, as it's now called in the US. And so I, at the age of 4, was introduced to a Commodore 64 computer. I fell in love and never looked back. I knew that this is the one passion that I wanted to pursue. And every single day, even to this day, I sometimes feel such deep satisfaction and a literal bubbling up of happiness from inside me just when I read something about computers that I hadn't understood before, or an algorithm that's clever, or an insight that I'd missed. So I'm 47 years old now, and I don't think this is going to change. This love is not going to go anywhere. So that's kind of who I am and where I came from, and the way in which I found my passion.
What a fascinating beginning to your life. I want to sort of walk it through from that wonderful childhood, what you described, and so when does that journey come to America? What does that look like? And then when did you build your first company? And
Sure. Yeah,
Can you
of course.
walk us from,
Yeah.
from that dining room table to this table here that we're seated at?
Absolutely. So there's, an old colonial school in Lahore, very much in the tradition of Eton and Harrow. It's called Aitchison College. It was established during colonial times, and it's considered one of the best all-boys school in Pakistan, really. So I was enrolled there because my father was enrolled there. My grandfather's brother was enrolled there. We had many generations of association with the school. Um, I started school there and somehow grudgingly made it all the way through eighth grade. And then one day I came back and told my father that this is it, I'm done, I'm leaving school. And my father said, well, why are you leaving school? And I said, this is just too boring. It's quite ridiculous. I just find no interest in the things that we're studying. I was very, very hands-on. Even at that time, I was tracking down encyclopedias. I remember writing, what at that age I thought was a policy note to an airbase commander who very kindly wrote back to me and said, actually, you make a couple of good points. So I was never shy of reaching out and putting my ideas out there. And then being open to what people told me. Sometimes people told me that, this is kind of goofy and adapt, and I would adapt. But I felt that was a much more powerful and interesting way of learning, and school was not yet quite up to the mark. They weren't so open to out-of-the-box ideas. So my father took me to this wonderful principal that we had. And when I describe Aitchison College, I mean, think Hogwarts. They wear the black capes and the house symbols, and I was in a house and all of this. So the principal said to my father, what might be the problem? And my father described the issue, and then the principal said, leave the boy with me and we will go off on a walk. And if in 20 minutes the boy can convince me that he's on the right track, then he's on the right track and I will certainly not get in his way. On the other hand, if the young man is convinced by what I have to say, then I need his promise that he will continue with his education the way that we all want him to. So after 25 minutes, a very flustered principal returned and said to my father, the boy won. And so
you were 8 or in the 8th grade?
8th grade. So
Okay,
I was
so
13.
13, okay.
And so I dropped out of school, and then in the next couple of years, I basically skipped the next 4 or 5 grades of school because we did the London University O and A levels, which was the equivalent of like high school and the first year of college. So I quickly took those exams. I just wanted to get them over and done with, because at that point, the burning passion in my life was, how do I get into computers seriously? Because I was already writing code. I was already running a BBS, which was sort of like a bulletin board system that people would dial into. I'd already created a community of friends in town where they were coming. So at age 15, after I did my O-levels and A-levels, I applied to a computer science college in Lahore and I got admitted. And then 2.5 years later, I finished my bachelor's. So I was 17 years old and I had my computer science bachelor's degree. And during this time, I launched a local company. I wrote to Sun Microsystems at the time and acted like I was a very big, businessman based in Lahore. And they wrote back and I got a resellership for some of their software products. And of course, all those responses used to go to my dad's fax machine.
Yeah.
And every day he would be like, what is this now? And, I told him that I was trying to get Sun to make me a reseller because I loved Unix. And so we did a little bit of that, and I did a few projects and made a little bit of side money, just being that, early stage entrepreneur, the kid hustle, that sort of thing. But then I came across some work that was, I also got into hacking a lot, because I think in those days, the penalties for curious kids were fairly minimal. My goal was never to hurt or harm anyone. It was always to just find out how these things worked. So two of the largest universities in the country I hacked. I hacked a US university at the time. I got into the national telecom
Okay.
system. And it was a lot of fun. And I never did anything wrong, but it was a tremendous amount of fun. And I kind of got that out of my system. And I realized that what I wanted to do was use my skills to build things, not to be clever and show people that there was something wrong or flawed in their stuff. I thought that the big value was in building cool things. And that's really what got me to looking at UT Austin. There was an amazing lab here. And I applied and I got in.
So, and this is mid 90s at this point,
Yeah.
and you're 18, 19 years
Yeah,
old?
I came to the US when I was 18.
Okay.
And the problem was, of course, that I already had a bachelor's.
Yeah.
So I had applied to only two schools.
Okay.
One was ETH, Zurich,
Okay.
because one of the all-time greats in programming languages, Niklas Wirth, was based in ETH. And in my early teens, when I was 12, 13 years old, I had a long-running correspondence with him. And I would write to him about some of the work that he had done with a new programming language called Oberon that he was working on. And one of his collaborators, a professor by the name of Gutknecht, had come up with a custom designed Unix workstation called Ceres. And I was quite enamored by that. So I kept pestering these guys. Of course, I would write letters and they would take 10 days to get there. And then, but very kindly, these gentlemen kept sending me back lots of papers that I would then read and try and understand. So I found them very endearing and helpful. And I was looking at them and I was looking at the Distributed Multimedia Computation Laboratory at UT Austin. But then I discovered that all of the computer science curricula at ETH was in German.
Okay.
And I figured, okay, well, I'm going to be, learning a tough subject.
Yes.
And then I'll also have to pick up a language. And this is not something that I could manage. So the UT Austin research was very quickly number one on my list. And I did not do what pretty much all my friends did, because it was that season where all kids our age go nuts and they start to apply everywhere.
Yes.
And then again, they're running around trying to get references. I did not do any of that. I had two of these schools. I applied to UT. I got in. I was lucky. And I came here. And as soon as I could, I started working at exactly that lab that I wanted to work at. However, when I came here, I discovered that, in my mind, I was coming here to do my master's. But then the grad school at the time told me that I was too young and I hadn't had 12 years in school. And that was one of the limitations. So they had me take upper div classes for a year. And I did various different interesting things. And then I got into the grad program. I was working towards my PhD. And in late 2000, I dropped out to start my first company.
And which company was that?
That company was called Curion. It was based on work that I had started at UT Austin. Okay. And back in the day, the web was very undeveloped. There was no real notion of web APIs. There was no notion of XML RPC or any of the formats that were later developed to easily exchange information and functionality between websites. So many of our customers, people like, let's say, Barnes & Noble, used our technology to build My Barnes & Noble, because what we had developed was an interpreter and a language that could point to various different websites and extract pieces of that website's functionality, where to that website, it would appear that the user is interacting with that website, but actually the whole flow would be pulled in, rebranded, and plugged in to another website. So you could have My Barnes & Noble with a FedEx tracker and a UPS tracker and a weather.com widget and an email from Yahoo and all of these things in a My Barnes & Noble experience, without any of the tooling in the back end having been developed yet. So for some financial services companies and for people like the big retailers. This was quite useful. We ran that company for a couple of years, and then it was I had a couple of co-founders with me. That company got acquired by iSyndicate, which at the time was the world's largest digital syndication company.
Okay.
I stayed with them for a little bit and then left to do another company, which was a distributed systems company.
Okay.
That was very quickly acquired because the whole investment climate at the time was changing. 9/11 had occurred.
Okay.
And
so now we're early 2000s. So
now we're early 2000s.
The first endeavor was late 90s, mid
2000, yeah. I started that in like late 98, and by late 2000, it was sold pretty much. 2000.
And was there ever a thought before you started your first company of going to IBM or one of the giants in the space, right? So you knew while you were at UT, you were going to create something. And did that come from that dining room table as well, this sort of entrepreneurial nature of yours? Or
I've had this conversation with myself many, many times. Yes. There's two dimensions of this. One dimension I understood at that time. The other one I've understood now. The first part is that if I admire Bill Gates as an example, right? A great entrepreneur. Why would I want to work for Bill Gates? I want to be Bill Gates,
yes.
right? If I admire Mark Andreessen, if I admire Michael Dell, I want to be like them.
Yes.
And the path to being like them is to go through the process that they went through, learn from their lives. But a corporate job and an entrepreneurial pursuit are two entirely different things. Mm-hmm. So that was one thing that was quite obvious to me even at the time, that I was enamored by and was impressed by how technical people had delivered great outcomes that were changing the world. And I say that slowly and carefully because what I now find is that people who see that the money is flowing in a direction go chase that money. Yeah. And in those days, it wasn't clear that if Bill Gates wrote the interpreter for BASIC on 4 or 5, Motorola CPUs and a Intel CPU, that would lead to Microsoft. That leap of faith would, I think even in his mind, did not exist. So all these guys did things because they thought it was important and they loved what they were doing. And they could do it themselves. I feel that we've lost touch with that. And a lot of people that have come into the industry don't love what they're doing, can't do it themselves, and they are fashion followers. The fashion followers get jaded first. And if in environments you have mostly fashion followers, then those environments collapse. The purpose of the environment collapses. What I find now in my later years of looking at a large number of companies, a lot of times people say, well, what's wrong with our innovation ecosystem? What's wrong with our companies? I think there's no one thing, but this is massively wrong with our companies.
Right. So right from the motivation. And, one of the things that struck me in the video, this being an innovator in the age of exponentials, was this notion that humans are innovation machines. And you describe why we innovate, and you give a couple of reasons, and I wonder if you could share those.
Of course.
And then personalize it, why you innovate.
So I think if you think about the dawn of science, right? We don't quite know how science dawned because we weren't around, but there's reasonable conjecture and reasonable stories for how. Because many cultures separately asked the same questions. There were, phases of the day and night. At night, stars would appear. Then they would move. There were large bodies like the sun and the moon, and they appeared as disks. Some questions were, well, are these stars and the moon and the sun all at the same distance from us? Are they in a firmament? where they are literally stuck on one surface. And then people started thinking about, well, we don't have a spaceship, we don't have pretty much anything else. What are indirect ways in which we can reason about this? So astronomy started to develop. Similarly, there were things that were internal to the mind, such as, well, why are we here? How do we think? Am I thinking right now? Who is it that's creating that voice in my? Do I have two voices in my head? Can one of those voices oversee the other voice? Is that another kind of consciousness that's overseeing my day-to-day activities? What is that? What happens once you become aware of things like that? You can run a lab inside your mind. You can run a lab with very small instruments, implements, measurements. You can be the Egyptian priests that watch the ebbs and flows of the Nile and compile that as secret data, and then use that to gain power with the pharaoh, because even though there is a clear geographical, geological, seasonal reason for why the Nile ebbs and flows, you are the one that has seen the pattern. You are the one that has recorded the pattern, and the data becomes power. So I'm giving you 3 examples of how in ancient societies, this desire to know more and the idea that knowledge is power, it can solve our problems, came about. But to me, you take the telescope as an example, and the telescope opens you up to realities which you would otherwise never know. There are things out there that you would simply never know. These days, I'm working with a company that does mesh networking technology, a company called Spec5. And the more and more I get into it, I realize, at some level, we all know that we're surrounded by radio. But you don't really know how much radio you're surrounded by. You don't really know how much of that radio traffic might be useful to you, or might be giving you indications of certain things happening in an area that may be relevant to you, even perhaps to your safety. And what is happening now is that we are getting better and better instruments. We already had the instrument of the mind that we enhanced through the era of the Greeks with the tools of logic. We enhanced that further with the tools of statistical reasoning. We added at the same time physical implements and measuring devices. And all of this contributed to the ability of mankind to see more and reason more. The computer is nothing but a continuation in this. As we have more data, we want to crunch larger numbers. Where did the first computers come from? The need to calculate artillery shell trajectories. And one of the contracts that the British government had given, for example, for the Colossus machine back in the 1800s. Well, yes, to break the code, but even before that, with Babbage and the analytical engine, which is where really programming came from with Lady Ada, and this is gears even before any electrical systems. All of those were inspired by how do I get the ballistics calculations on a cannon right. One of the greatest, progenitors of cybernetics and also artificial intelligence, Norbert Wiener at MIT, the job that he was given in the Second World War and also in the interim between the First and the Second World War was, Norbert, these aircraft now move very fast and they also maneuver, and our guys can't get them in the sight because you've got to follow these aircraft or lead these aircraft. You can't just shoot at the aircraft. So how does the sight and the person and the physics of the person and the biology of the person and the physics of the site and the physics of the aircraft all get rolled into one equation so that when the person points roughly at the aircraft as they would impulsively, everything else gets adjusted and you get the right aim point. Now, he wasn't able to solve that problem, but that problem formalized cybernetics and the problems of control. So really, if you think about how all of this has come to be, how all of human progress has happened, it's started with these initial questions, but very quickly we've tried to give structure to these questions. We haven't just satisficed with, the tree is a god and the rock is a god and the water is a god. Those are answers. But obviously we didn't find them to be entirely satisfactory answers, which is why our questions kept being raised and we kept developing tools.
So there's a curiosity piece.
Massive.
Yeah. And do you think that was for you fostered at that dinner table, or was that something innate in you, or is it innate in all humans, that curiosity to go beyond what is seen, go beyond what is known? How does that manifest itself?
I was always very curious. That is true. Now, it could be I was always very curious because my parents were always very curious.
Yes.
And just walking around my father's library, all the kinds of books that he had. For example, the first computer science books that I found were books printed in the 70s about mainframes. And my father had no business having those books, right? Because he was an economist anyway. But he was curious about everything. So you could find everything in his library. Now, that doesn't mean that 4 or 5 children being raised in the same home will be photocopies of each other, Xerox copies of each other. So I think there is certainly an element of who you are, what appeals to you, what you can get from the environment. But one other thing also, I think, is the role of parents, which if you believe in such a thing, my father was not one who was high on praise. Like, for example, I wouldn't be praised by him every day. No. However, sometimes I would say things and I did not expect that to be worthy of praise. And he would be extremely proud. And he would go, for example, I remember this one thing, it's seared in my mind. He was dropping me to school. And I was thinking about symbols and languages and so on. And I was maybe 6, 7 years old. And I said to him, Father, aren't alphabets just symbols that have some intrinsic meaning? And he just stopped me right there and he said, well, repeat that. And I did. And he said, now, what do you mean by this? And I explained to him that, these are arbitrary symbols and they just have been given some meaning. And when they're put together, they can have different meanings and the meanings change. And so he said, you're on to something. And I want you to think about it at school. Then when we saw my grandmother, he called me up and I had a lot of respect for my grandmother. There was a level of formality. And he said to me, would you repeat for your grandmother what you told me? And she was a writer and she listened to me and very carefully, she had her eyes up as if she was thinking. And then she came back to me and then she put her hand on my head and then she said, say it again. And I did. And then she said, you're a very intelligent boy. And it's so difficult to explain the power of something like that. My father took an interest. He remembered. It was enough for him to follow up. He took it to my grandmother. My grandmother wanted to know more. All of these are clues that what the child is saying has some value. And not everything the child says will be noticed, but things that pass muster, that pass a certain level, will be acknowledged. Not acknowledged in the yay and, just sort of the everyday kind of mechanism. But you will now be my peer because you have come up with a brilliant thought that if one of my peers had shared with me, I would entertain with the same seriousness. That to me was the biggest encouragement.
Amir, I thought we were going to have a conversation about technology and the future. But as you're talking, I'm thinking more as a parent and how I want to raise my kids in this world, right? So this curiosity, these questions now are being answered by an AI. So instead of asking your grandmother or your dad, we're masses of people are asking an AI what they think. What do you think the implications are for us as parents as we go into this bold new world? Is that something to be cautious of? Is it, I recall reading a recent study from MIT that suggested that the brain activity in those that are using AI is actually diminishing. So, yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
So obviously, this is a situation that we all must live through every day, because all these LLMs and tools are everywhere. They're being embedded into so many applications. I've got a 21-year-old who's about to get done with his degree at UT, then a 20-year-old who will get done next year, hopefully, and then an 11-year-old. So that's the span of kind of ages in my home. And we have these conversations on an everyday basis. The things that I do is that I've never asked them to not use these tools. So that's one.
Mm-hmm.
It may not work for everyone, but I've never asked them to not use these tools. The second thing is that because I am very curious about a large number of ideas, every time I do something interesting, I make it a point that they know that this thing can be done.
Mm-hmm.
If they're curious, some of the things I do, they're not at all curious about.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the things I do might touch on shared interests,
Mm-hmm.
and they want to know a little bit. So I'll give you an example. I'm into generative art. And for years, I've just as a side thing, I love using algorithms to produce beautiful art. Well, some of the underlying algorithms can be reused for behaviors in what's called synthetic life, virtual life, which is an area that's been artificial life. It's been going around for a long time. Now, my oldest son is doing a degree in computational neuroscience.
Okay.
And for years, he's been interested in simulations of how organisms evolve. So very simple organisms, they can go around, they eat, they can sleep, they can fight with another organism. And if you introduce many of them and you reduce the food, you increase the food, what happens to the dynamics of the population? And over years and years and years, he's done a lot of that. So I showed that to him and he became very interested. He's built some simulations, but then he improved them. Similarly, my son number 2, he is a purist. Mm-hmm. So he is both a disciplinarian in the family and also a purist. He has decided that he's not going to use LLMs for a while for most things.
Uh-huh.
And I asked him why. And I said, look, I use them, but here's how I use them. And I can tell you that the way I'm using them is not harmful, because I'm using it as an ideation tool. Mm-hmm. I'm not using it as a way to get my work done or to outsource so much of my thinking that at the end I ask myself, well, what did I do, right? Exactly. And I've given him many patterns. But he says, look, I'm a student. You're 47 years old. You grew up in an era where LLMs weren't a thing. So if we talk about calculus, you did it by pen and paper. And now you might not remember all of it, but at least you can jog your mind and get there.
Yes.
You learned how to program manually on your own.
Mm-hmm.
The danger for me is that I never go through those steps. And the kind of depth with which these ideas need to be instilled in my brain, I might never reach that depth. So I have decided that I'm not going to use these things.
And so in practice, he's talking about first principles, right? He which is something you talk about in the video, always coming back to first principles. Can you share your vision for that, or your belief on first principles? principles?
Absolutely. Across many domains, there are some fundamental truths that undergird the entire science, the entire field.
Uh-huh.
So, as an example, let's bring in a little bit of artificial intelligence. Uh, there are two big camps right now. One says that, these neural networks will never yield artificial general intelligence or human level intelligence, let's call it. And another that says, of course it will. Now, there are finer points to this discussion, such as, well, do you need more data? Will data scale us all the way there? Do you need a fundamentally different approach? What do you need to do? But let's examine the very first issue, which is that can neural networks deliver human level intelligence? Well, there is a theorem which says that neural networks are universal approximators of functions. And if you think of your brain as a function in the following sense, that you have some internal impetus, so an internal input, you have ears as an input, you have your nose as an input, you have your skin as an input, etc. Based on all those inputs, you are taking all of that information to your brain, and then you're making a decision that puts you into the subsequent state of your evolution. Somebody pokes you, you could ignore it. Somebody pokes you, you might, fling at him. Somebody pokes you, you might turn around. These are decisions that you would make. Now, that function, in a mathematical sense, it is all your inputs going into the function, and the function produces an output. A neural network is a universal function approximator, meaning given enough data, a neural network can approximate really any function to an arbitrary degree of accuracy. So it's very important to understand that there is nothing fundamentally impossible in a neural network of substantial size, trained with substantial data, arriving at the same decisions that a human brain would arrive given the same inputs. At that point, would you say that that neural network is AGI? I personally would, but a lot of people will say, but what about spirit, and what about God, and what about etc.?
Intuition?
Intuition is, in some sense, intuition is a simulation that you run in your head and then come up with a conclusion, right? So what is intuition? Your intuition is, I haven't done it in the real world, but I think this is not going to go well. Well, how? Either it's a lookup, the intuition comes from past experiences, or the intuition comes from you playing out a scenario in your mind and then coming up to the conclusion that what you want won't happen. You're going to throw a basketball into a basket, and you see a child, you see how distant the basket is, you see the angle. It hasn't happened yet, but you run a physics simulation in your mind, and it says, my intuition is you're not going to get this. What's happening there is you are running a physics simulation in your mind, and you are imagining what happens, and then you're saying, so that's one form of intuition.
Okay. I hadn't thought of it that way, but when you describe it like that, it kind of makes sense.
Yeah. And the other form of intuition is not even such active work, because this is active work. The other form of intuition is this guy is a liar. He lies to me every single time. 100 times I've spoken to him, I've heard 99 lies from him. What do you think the 101st would be? Probably a lie. That's my intuition. That's more Bayesian thinking,
Yeah. So the example I'm thinking of, I was a ship captain in the Navy. My ship had 8,500 sensors on it, a very distributed network. But somehow the captain, me, knew by a shift in the tone, a smell, if something wasn't right. Maybe that's a little bit of captain's lure, because we become sort of one with the machine. that was the example, or maybe it's just in my head that I had this
No,
sense of the machine that we were
you
taking.
probably did, because, for 10, 12 years, for the largest
Yeah.
industrial and defense customers, we did the same thing. We
Yeah.
would go in and they would say, okay, here's a bunch of heavy machinery, a turbine, a generator, a pump, and our standard systems can't predict failures. Can you apply AI to pick up those failures? And Michael, the kinds of correlations that we found, which were not first order, but sometimes second order and third order, that no human being would even think about, that had something to do with machine failure. They were rampant. They happened
Yeah.
all over. The sounds, I'll tell you about arcing. There's certain processes, like, for example, in battery plants and so on, electric systems, some amount of arcing is okay. The arcing
Yes.
of the jumping
Yes.
of the electrons. Some amount of arcing is okay, but arcing produces its own sound.
Yes.
And so these guys became so good that they would detect when the frequency of the arcing had shifted, and that would be like, oh, I got to go check that.
Yes.
That arcing is different too, whereas everybody else would still see an arc.
Yeah.
So there are myriad examples of people. That, by the way, is the Stuxnet story too. One can never know for sure, but one version that I've heard is that the Iranian engineers that were in the field, because there were very micro perturbations caused to put the centrifuges slightly off center, so that when they started rotating at a high rate of speed, they would just fly off or damage, right? And these guys were good enough to, in that whole plant, there's all this clanking and clicking and all this going on. And some of them were like, none of the sensors are showing this bad reading.
Yes.
But this sound, I've never heard this sound before.
Right.
And so that actually then caused them to start to investigate. So good maintenance people, whether it's US captains or whether it's people working in the electrical grid, people that have been around machinery, really in their neural network,
Yes.
start to learn what the characteristics of that and the behavior of that system is, that an ordinary person without training or exposure wouldn't know.
Yeah. Amir, this is called the Skapa Podcast, Creating the Future, right? And you are one of the most amazing creators, inventors, people that can see the future, but more than that, actually deliver on the future. And so at this stage of the conversation, I could go on for hours, of your fascinating sort of upbringing and contributions to the world. I want you to project for our audience forward what the world looks like. I think this is what you talk about in the book, both for society, but also for the defense application.
Sure.
So wide open question here.
Yeah.
I know you've thought a lot about and written about it, not only in this book, but your previous book, the Sentient Machine.
Yeah.
Hyperwar. So this is something that you've not only thought about, you've written about, and then through your companies actually delivered to those ends. So yeah, just take us, paint the picture for us, Amir, if you can, and take us on a journey about the future.
Well, thank you, Michael. That's obviously what I am obsessed with, and I think about that so much. So it's always a pleasure to talk about these things. So if you kind of zoom out and you say, okay, where are we in terms of the limits of science?
Okay.
So we have spacecraft that can do certain things. We can maybe go up to the moon. We're trying to get to Mars. We have small exploratory craft that can maybe even cross the limits of the solar system and beyond, but these are not like commercially viable yet. Okay, but we have a large collection of satellites in low Earth orbit and also geostationary orbit. This we've achieved. Now let's look at kind of power. Power is a huge deal. So with power, we now have new technologies for miniaturized nuclear plants And many of these are much safer than the technology from the past. China is one of the world leaders in this area. China has also revolutionized solar. So one of the case studies I write in this book is actually the world's most shocking solar case study, which is that Pakistan is a country of about 225 million people. So not a small country, sixth largest country in the world. And they had an installed capacity of 42 gigawatts of power from various different sources. Over the last 3 years, they became the number one customer for Chinese solar. And on a totally decentralized basis, individuals, companies, power plants that are run by industrial concerns have doubled the country's power capacity, but 45 gigawatts of it is decentralized, meaning they control it. So that's been a huge boon for the country, because one metric by which you measure progress in an industrialized society is power availability per capita, right? And they've been able to do it within 3 years with no real issues and anybody getting in the way. I mean, they've just sort of made it happen. So that's a point on power. You were about to say something.
Well, does that shift the power dynamic, pun intended, to the Middle East, because there's a lot of energy reserves there, or how does that
in a country like Pakistan, the ability for each individual to consume more and more power is still there, because the historic levels at which they've been consuming per capita power have been low compared to, let's say, the most developed countries on earth, right? So even if they double their power and they bring in solar, they still need more power. For which they're also investing in a big way in nuclear. And so that's another part of the story. But anyway, on power, I just want to use them as a use case, but to say that solar has arrived, and in the sixth largest country in the world, in 3 years, they have doubled their capacity purely through decentralized solar. No one in the world can ignore that. And the reason why that's happened is because the Chinese have robotically enabled solar factories, which is why the cost of the per kilowatt bought from China on a panel is basically nothing. It's, you can get several kilowatts for like a McDonald's Happy Meal. It's literally down to that level. So that's power. Power is super important. Space is a special kind of communications and logistics, but then other kinds of logistics. You talk about EVs, and you talk about trains, and you talk about all these things. These you can commonly read about. Then you talk about computing, because all of them are becoming faster and they're spreading deeper. Then you talk about computing, and computing is going in all directions. Computing, on the one hand, this year we will build more data centers in the US than we will build commercial real estate for the first time in the history of this country. There will be more spent on data centers than on commercial real estate. So that's a huge growth in compute capacity coming up, and also globally. What will we do with this compute capacity? Will it become the new utility? Does that just get embedded in every product ever shipped from here on out? Then we talk about things like food and what we can do. So over the last 100 years, we took 80% of our population that was growing food for us down to 2%. Can that 2% become 0.2% or 0%? Because now that we've got these essentially robotic warehouses and greenhouses, you can produce through hydroponics and through sensors, you can produce really, really high quality food. And the reason that you would do that is not to put the 2% out of business, because we've already gone from 80% to 2%. The reason for it is because food is a fundamental right. Now, I believe, and you can check, I believe the United States is one of the only countries on earth that, when it comes to the UN, does not accept food to be a fundamental right. But technology can make it so. The reasons why the US doesn't want to do that might be to do with subsidies that it gives its farmers and other such things. But come on, the time is now here to where the people of the world have to yield the benefits of technology. Otherwise, as I talk about in the book, theories expounded by people such as Professor Peter Turchin, who has been studying this phenomenon of elite overproduction. and the notion of why societies crash and why societies rise, and whether it's as simple as a revolt by the peasants. That generally is not how it happens. Generally, the way it works, he's built his argument off of the largest database of societal rise and fall and many empirical factors that contribute to all of that. And his conclusion is that it's always the educated, empowered elite that has been othered that causes the light of rebellion to be lit in a society. And then, of course, they can convince the masses. But Robespierre was not hungry. And the Bolsheviks were educated. They caused the death and destruction of millions upon millions of people, not because they were going hungry. And you go through revolution upon revolution. So in our country, what we need to guard against is technology being used for the benefit of some. What does the future look like given all of this? First of all, I think that the future in the East and the West might look very different. In general, I find that in Asia, where people are more used to seeing the benefits of technology, and just to be very practical and concrete, I've been to China, I don't know, 11 or 13 times. I've been to Dubai and Abu Dhabi and the UAE every year for the past maybe 30 years. And in those places, technology is a happy, happy thing. Places that were hard to get to are easy to get to. Places that were hard to sit in because they were hot or not clean are beautiful and pristine. Physical areas that had natural beauty that you simply couldn't get to because of either logistics or the fact that there was no building there to go visit, or it would be hard to traverse the desert. All those problems have been solved. There was very little to do. Now there's a lot to do. There's imagination all around you. I took my mother and my wife to the Dubai Museum of the Future, where robots, I went up to this robot and I asked it to create custom perfumes that my mother loved and my wife loved, and it combined dynamically and built that. I'm not saying that that is an end unto itself, but it is imagination. It is an idea of what machines can do for human beings, and what it's mixing today. You might say, oh, you elitist, you're talking about perfumes, but that same technology also mixes drugs and personalized doses for patients. So the use of technology for the creation of a society that can elevate humankind, that is a goal that is worth pursuing. And if you are totally realistic about it, we didn't stop dying from disease due to anything other than technology. We didn't understand our place in this universe due to anything other than technology. We didn't discover this earth on the seas, in the air, on the ground, distant places, underneath the ground, underneath the sea, through anything other than technology. We did not uncover the secrets of our own human past through anything other than technology. And we did not improve our longevity. We did not take over and solve many diseases. We did not deliver more calories per capita with anything other than technology. That was not dogma. That was not finger wagging. That was not holier than thou speeches. It was scientists and engineers with steely determination, rolling up their sleeves and getting it done. And that, to me, is a choice. We can either sit by the sidelines and croak and complain and cry, but then where are we in this world? What is the locus of control that we see for ourselves? Are we just the people that things happen to? And every problem that we have, the government must invent a new law to come and save us? Or do we also have some of that human agency and some of the ability to organize labor and some of the a capacity of our mind to apply to building this future. And I am one of those.
Yeah.
I am not wanting people to tell me what the future is. I want to build the future.
What an interesting and visionary view of the future society. And it's, I'm at Skapa, which is Swedish for to create. I have a small team trying to build some capability for defense and security. It's so interesting to be on this side of the, when I was at Task Force 59, I was a customer. I was trying to leverage technology to get an advantage against a potential adversary, to turn inside quicker than them. So it's been a joy for me to create with my folks at Skapa. I wonder if you could share and just kind of close us out here with, when did you write Hyperwar? How long ago was that?
2018.
28. So now 7 years ago. So fast forward 7 years. Did you get it right? Are we in what you described during Hyperwar?
General Aaron and I got it completely right.
Yeah.
If you go look at the book and you extract all the major claims that we made, including many of the scenarios that were published in the Hyperwar book about specific kinds of attacks that might materialize in future, for example, in the section around SUAS, etc. I don't think we could have gotten that book more right. Is that a good thing? Probably not, because unfortunately, the book did not inspire action and did not inspire the development of antidotes to what we had proposed. One of my big lessons in working with the US DoD in particular is that I love them. I've had a deep relationship with them for many, many years at many, many levels. And it's sort of like, I don't look at them as a customer, and many of them don't look at me as a vendor. It's sort of like kind of all in the family type of a discussion, like I used to have with you.
Well,
right?
and that's what brought our worlds together.
That's what brought our. So for me, I'm like past all that. So the way that I look at it is I say, okay, look, I understand that you guys as in DoD, have some fundamental problems that no one person can probably fix. Like one problem is that you are never anywhere for more than 2 years. You can never really take ownership of a long-term meaningful problem, right? So the next guy comes in, he wants or she wants her mark on the thing, and often things change, human psychology. What are you going to do? That's one big problem. The second problem is that acquisition is so problematic that instead of focusing on the use case and the problem that needs to be solved, the officer oftentimes working with whoever's with him is totally caught up in how do I pay for this and what do I do and so on. I do an army training annually multiple times, and I won't name what session it is. But on 2 of those sessions back to back, these are all 3 and sometimes 4 stars that are in that session. So I've told them, I've described a piece of technology, and they're like, this is super cool. We should definitely have it. And I said, okay, I'll give it to you for free. I've done that twice. They cannot get it for free. Because what happens is that they depute that action out to somebody, right? Because a general can't say, well, here's my credit card and there you go, right? That's just not the system. So they have to go through somebody who has to go through somebody, has to go through, and then it's Chinese whispers. And then, what started off being a balloon ended up becoming a plant, and nobody knows what this is, or, such and such general said. And so I've even just done experiments and just reminded them multiple. I said, look, first of all, there's zero interest for me. So let's take that thing out. Like I'm trying to be some clever defense, vendor trying to make money off you. I'm saying take it for free. Do you have the ability to even take a gosh darn thing for free? And when you don't, then that's a statement. It's not, I'm not trying to be funny. I'm just trying to say that obviously there is a problem. And so acquisition is a problem. And so my solution, not to complain now, my solution is I'm just going to put them on the shelf. I'm just not going to worry about them coming to me and me filling out forms and doing this and doing that and the other thing. I'm just going to do mostly, dual use stuff.
Uh-huh.
And all of it is going to be designed to be modular. And they can come buy it from the Walmart or they can buy it from Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
And when they say, hey, I need this capability, just, go to Amazon, use your Amazon card and just get it.
Mm-hmm.
Because that is proof point of the fact that if you need it enough, you're going to go get the thing. And I am not smart enough to deal with your acquisition process, nor do I want to go and hire 50x DOD types and lawyers and politicians. And you know how this works, right? It's been very, very. I'm not sharing secrets here. I just don't have the. I am a builder. I much prefer spending my time building things as opposed to paying the guards of the revolving door. So I'm just going to keep building things. And they're going to be dual use. So civilians can buy them and they are buying them. Like this mesh communications company, who got over 6,000 customers in 15, 16 months. And some of them are defense customers, but at very low rates of adoption. But if they understand the value of it, then they'll buy it. And if what I'm doing is dumb, then they won't buy it. And, that's it. I'm not going to fight them anymore. Yeah. I'm not going to try and get there and beg them and do any of that. I'm always available to them to share what I know. And I'm always available for them to make use of any of the technology that we come up with. But I cannot do what they want me to do, which is to get into the system and become that system, because I'm not that guy. I just can't do it.
Well, I can tell you, from personal experience as we wrap up here, you were so generous with me, with your time. On the Innovation Advisory Board. Your voice is if you guys go online to the Digital Ocean, IAB, you'll hear Amir's voice narrating our big, bold vision. I think that was 4 or 5 years ago, which is coming into reality. I am so happy. I could go on for hours, Amir.
I really could.
We should definitely do that. I did want to close with one question.
Yeah.
Actually, 2 questions is, do you still have that Commodore 64 computer? You do?
Yeah, that's never going to leave me.
Okay. And then, my brother, I can't remember the make. It was a Texas Instruments computer that came out about the same time.
TRS-80.
Yeah, okay, that's the one. But my brother would take it apart.
Yeah.
And then build it back again. Did you do stuff like that? Okay. Yeah.
So, those 3 computers, the one that came before the Commodore 64 was called the Commodore PET.
Okay.
So the Apple II, the Commodore PET, and the TRS-80 were called the Holy Trinity of 1977.
Wow.
So those were important computers. And on all 3 of them, eventually, the BASIC that those booted to was written by Microsoft, Bill Gates. So Bill Gates himself wrote that BASIC. And that's one of his direct handiwork. So those are important computers.
Well, speaking of legacies, I kind of want to come back to where we started. Amir, you personally and your video inspired me to do some very, I think, significant work, not only at NATO on the Maritime Unmanned Systems Initiative, but was central to what I did at Task Force 59. And I used, with your permission, I used a lot of that video in my Commodore's philosophy there at Task Force 59. More importantly, we breathed life into it. We lived it. And it's been, I make it required watching for people that I have at Skapa by Saab.
I'm very grateful to you, Michael. And, our fearless leader from those days is now, of course, Commander CENTCOM.
Yes.
So
Admiral
very
Cooper.
happy to see Admiral Cooper because he's a bright, reasonable,
Risk
person,
taker.
risk taker, and a thinker.
Yes.
And that's really what we need more.
Yeah.
So I was, I've had lovely conversations with him in the past. I sent a congratulatory message to him, and I wish him the very best. But good man for the job. Yeah.
Well, that's it for the Skapa Podcast. Please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. And thanks again, Amir, for this great conversation.
Thank you so much, Michael.